On today's episode, our guest is John Dehlin. John is a blogger and longtime host of the Mormon Stories Podcast, which he has hosted since 2005. Back in the dizzle, folks. A long time ago. I didn't even know. What were you doing in 2005? I sure as hell wasn't listening to podcasts. No. I was walking the halls of my junior high school. I was a 7th grade kid. Walking the halls, probably had a puka shell necklace, maybe a shag haircut, maybe the cargo shorts with all the pockets. No doubt I had a pair of Iversons on my feet. I was probably passing love notes, talking to girls, discovering how hot they were. And I was suffering from NRBs every time I stood up from a classroom chair. So in other words, John's been in the game for a while. He's done over 1,000 episodes, and there's a lot of controversy behind John Dehlin. A lot of controversy behind him because about 5 or 6 years ago, he was excommunicated from the church for his opposition to the church's stance on gay marriage. And there are a lot of those out there that think his excommunication was a good call. There's a lot of those out there that think it wasn't a good call. And I think either opinion's okay. You know, in the last 5 or 10 years, there's certainly been a lot of changes in society or in opinions, particularly to the topic of gay marriage, whether it's within this religion or any other religion or politically or legally. And I think it's interesting to see how things move. You can call it things progress. You can call it digress. I don't care. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, and that's kind of what this show's about. We don't really back away from any topic. And I don't think we discourage any type of opinion on this show. And so I had a really nice conversation with John Dehlin. I think he's a really nice guy. I don't necessarily agree with everything he said. There are certainly some things I definitely agree with to a very high degree. And so I think it was an important thing to talk with him. And I think it's important for everybody to be heard, no matter what their opinion is, no matter what their story is. And so you can take it for what it's worth. Now, if listening to someone else talk about opinions they may have that are different than the things you might believe, then maybe this episode's not your cup of tea, and that's okay. But I think it was an important conversation. Now, just a disclaimer, this interview was done in, March or April of last year. We haven't got around to releasing it, but we felt it's a good time. I personally think it's an important topic. Now, the whole episode isn't about the topic of gay marriage or homosexuality, but there's a good deal about that. And for me personally, I've got friends and family that have dealt with the same thing, and I've at times kind of been in a difficult spot of wondering how to tackle the whole issue. And I think there's a lot of people out there in the same situation. And if there are changes in the church or in any organization or in any legal situation, I think it's probably a good thing if it involves, love and acceptance. Now, it can obviously go too far. Any situation can go too far and the pendulum can swing, and then it's craziness, right? So that's why I think talking about things, especially talking about things amongst people who disagree with each other, or listening to one side of an opinion and listening to another and then formulating your own, I think is always a good thing to do. So I enjoyed my conversation with him. I hope you will as well. Here he is, John Dehlin.
What is wrong with these people? They have no willpower.
The show goes on! This is my home!
Well, we're not participating in that. We have no interest.
We can't have anyone freak out there, okay? We gotta keep our composure! We've gone too far! There's too much to lose! We gotta keep our composure!
John, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
Founder and host of the Mormon Stories Podcast. You're doing a bunch of other things now. How many episodes have you done?
We're almost at about 1,100.
Okay, and you've been doing that since
2005.
Jeez. People had to go to a desktop to listen to a podcast at that time, right?
No, the iPod.
iPods, I guess.
The iPods existed before 2005. I think the iPhone came out around 2005, 2006, something like that. But
Jeez.
It was right there at the end of the iPod era, the beginning of the iPhone era.
Wow. Well, and
can you imagine there was a time when there wasn't an iPhone? I bet you can't even remember.
It's wild. It's wild.
Pre-iPhone. How old were you in 2004?
Well, in 2004, I was 13, 14 years old. So, but I mean, just the way technology's changed is insane. I mean, I didn't have a smartphone till after my mission, 2012, but it's now it's like it's the main source of media, it seems. There's more people listening to podcasts than watching network television, and it's where people get their info from. So you've done a bunch. Now this is on this podcast, we don't really hide back from anything, and our audience is pretty unique.
Who's your audience?
We have everybody in our audience, from active stake presidents to anti-Mormons and everybody in between. So it's unique, but we're also about being open about stuff and getting to the bottom of things. And so, truth be told, one of the reasons one of my guys isn't here today is because he felt a little apprehensive. Not because he didn't want to talk about some of the things, but because he was a little worried participating in talking about some of the controversial things and how it would be perceived by friends or family, which is, all about this. It won't be new to you.
That's why they excommunicate you.
Right.
So that people are uncomfortable communicating with you.
Yeah. So
that's why they do it.
So that's why I will apologize that one of my guys isn't here. But you can't blame him because you know how he feels.
I get it.
You've been there. So
I live it every day.
I'm sure. One of the things, so I've been watching your stuff off and on since I'd say probably 2012. And the first thing, before we kind of get into your background and why you started and kind of your story with that, I guess, one of the first things, the first thing I remember ever seeing of yours was a TED Talk that you gave. And it was your TED Talk about gay marriage. And it completely changed my perspective on the issue. I was always just standard, run-of-the-mill, very conservative, which I still lean conservatively on most issues, but social issues, I've really changed my tune. And that was one of the beginning things, was your TED Talk that you gave on that. And I'd like to play the questions you posed and then kind of talk a little bit about that. But first, you started out your TED Talk. Where'd you give this, by the way? Was this?
Utah State University.
And that's where you're from, correct?
No, I grew up in Texas, but
Okay.
I got my PhD. I got 2 masters and a PhD at Utah State.
Okay.
So I lived there for like 14 years.
Okay, so I'm going to play a little bit of this. And you started out talking about revered people, people that have invoked really important social change. We put them on the back of money. We make movies about them. We write books about them. And then you asked some questions to the audience, and I'll just kind of play it from here. Great pants in this, by the way. 2013.
My wife dressed
You've
me.
upgraded in your fit. They're more
You're making fun of me.
form fit. Hey, you should have seen the pants I came home from my mission in.
Yeah, but I'm a grown man. My wife dressed me. By show of hands, how many of you today oppose slavery? Raise your hand. Excellent. Nice work. All right, next question. You're doing great. How many of you support the right of women and racial minorities to vote? Beautiful. Pat yourselves on the back. All right. Okay. Now, next question. Why haven't they made a movie about you? I can think of at least 2 reasons why. First, pretty much everyone agrees with you. And second, I think it costs you literally nothing to hold these points of view. And to help illustrate, now I have a follow-up question. Ready? How many of you are outspoken advocates or allies for the rights and the well-being of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people? Raise your hand. Okay, a lot less hands. And that's okay. It's completely normal in 2013 to not be.
Few hands there.
Right.
And I bet if you had those same people and you asked that question in 2019, there'd be a different amount of hands. Still not as many as you'd hope for, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You kind of seemed ahead of your time in the community there. And you were, how was that received as you spoke out about that?
Anytime you take a stand like that, you're going to have people that make you feel really good because they agree with you. And then a lot of other people that are really uncomfortable, and they usually won't say anything. Especially in Utah, there aren't a lot of haters who will come up to you and criticize you or disagree with you. The modus operandi here is just to ignore
Yeah.
and avoid. So
That's what we do.
yeah,
Mormons are very good at that. It's like,
Yeah, yeah.
no, I'm just going to stay out of that, and this is me and
like
my stuff.
Kind of like your buddy.
Kind of, yeah. He's not here.
That's all right.
So
No,
he's
it's all right.
good.
No, and it's it's fine because we're taught as Mormons the contentions of the devil, right? And so all they're doing is avoiding what they think is evil, and so yeah, so it feels good to do something like that because all the professors and administrators and community members who agree with you, they'll stop you in the grocery store, or they'll pat you on the back, they'll stop you and say, hey, that was really courageous. You helped me. Thank you. You voiced what I wanted. So it's all positive, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, except when you have to talk to the bishop.
Right.
And it was just a few months after I gave this talk where the bishop called me in to begin my disciplinary council
Wow.
to excommunicate me.
That began in
2014.
Okay.
No, sorry. Yeah. I gave this talk in 2013 fall. Bishop called me in January-ish 2014. And because of all the national uproar, the excommunication got delayed and I was excommunicated in February 2015. So it took about a year.
And that was back then. Do you think that it would have been any different now?
Yeah, I don't think the church would have excommunicated me for that now. No way. In fact, you've got a jersey of Steve Young up there. Steve Young and his wife, Barbara, are total LGBT allies. They came out on the stage of Love Loud with Dan Reynolds and Imagine Dragons just a few months back here in Rice-Eccles Stadium.
They're going to give him a disciplinary council then?
No, it's the point is that
Yeah.
I did it back when it
time.
was controversial and maybe that led the way for others to be able to feel more comfortable being outspoken, but you kind of pay the price when you lead out on something like that.
Right. Which is a good thing. There's negatives.
Depends on your beliefs, I think.
Right.
There's still a lot of people that don't support same-sex marriage.
Of course. And it's hard. I think in Christianity, it's always going to be a tough question. It's going to be hard for Christians to support it. I mean, don't you think doctrinally it would be kind of tough for that?
Yeah, more and more. I think overall.
So was this?
I mean, it depends. Protestant Christians are cool with it. So if you go to a lot of Presbyterians, Lutherans, Episcopalians, Methodists, even liberal Catholics, there are religions that are more progressive, and they're going to have lesbian priests and they're going to perform gay marriages. But there's going to be more conservative religions like Jehovah's Witness and Mormons and Orthodox Catholics and evangelical Christians and Muslims that are going to be not supportive. So you can't say all religions or even all Christian religions are the same on that score.
Right.
Interestingly, the ones that are more affirming, LGBT affirming, are dying. And that's its own kind of...
Really?
Yeah, for the most part.
You were saying Protestants are more or Presbyterian.
And Protestant Christianity is kind of dying.
Right.
Yeah.
So with what was your big reason for doing this? You talk in this TED Talk, which people should go watch it, a lot about some personal experiences you had, your upbringing and how your opinion of homosexual marriage and the LGBT community changed. Talk a little bit about why that occurred and why you wanted to give that message.
So I graduated from BYU really conservative. I was a Republican. I loved Rush Limbaugh. He was really popular at the time. And I grew up very uncomfortable with homosexuals. There were some kids who I figured were gay in high school, and they always made me uncomfortable. And so, I had a pretty normal life that way in terms of like what the 80s and 90s would have produced. But what happened was I met a few of them and actually had conversations. So I had a couple cousins come out. I talk about this, I think, in the TED Talk. I had a couple cousins come out as gay. And that was a little bit shocking. And then, as I talked about in the TED Talk, I met a guy when I was working in Chicago who for months I didn't know he was gay. And he just really helped me and was super kind and honest and loving. And again, I had no clue because he wasn't effeminate in any stereotypical way. So that was sort of a little bit subversive because I got to know him, got to love him, got to really appreciate him, really respect him. And then I found out by making a gaffe and sort of making a derogatory comment about gay people. And he's like, hey, I got something to tell you. And that was the first time I had really had to confront my bigotry. But then later, as I was starting to question, struggle with Mormonism, right around that same time, my wife's cousin, Scott, who grew up Catholic, he came out to us as gay. And again, no signs. He was an NCAA athlete, brilliant artist, guitarist, smart guy. He could wipe me on the tennis court, and I was a good tennis player, and he could mop the floor with me. And when he came out as gay and told us he almost killed himself, that was like a second, or if you count my cousins, a third and a fourth time where I'm like, whoa. And when you talk to him and you actually get to know him, instead of just tell them they're doing what's wrong and tell them how they should live and tell them to follow your views of religion, when you actually talk to them, you find out they would have never chosen it. Who would choose it? I mean, society's built for heterosexual marriage and families. It's glorified everywhere. It's supported everywhere. And so it makes sense once you're open, and you have to be cracked open, because if you're an Orthodox religious person, you're not open. But if you get cracked open for some reason, and then you actually sit down with them, look them in the eye, and have them tell you their story, then you're like, oh my gosh, you didn't choose this. You tried for years to try and change it. Trying to change it almost killed you. And you've known that you were this way since you were 13. And when you hear that story over and over and over again, and then you start learning about the suicides, which by the time I was at Microsoft in 2000, there was a young man named Stuart Mattis who drove up to the steps of his local ward building, pinned a note to his chest that said, "Do not resuscitate," and he shot himself on the steps of the church building. And that came out around 2000 while I was working at Microsoft, having a bit of a faith crisis, met Scott, and I'm like, there's something wrong here. So it was just life experience and being open.
Yeah.
And you're not really open until it happens to you. So the cliche is you're an Orthodox Mormon conservative couple with kids, and then your kid comes out as gay. And before your kid comes out as gay, you could care less about gay people. But as soon as it's your child, if you happen to love your child more than your beliefs, which you
should,
but generally
not always the case, it seems.
If you happen to love your kid more than your beliefs, then all of a sudden the issue matters. And so that makes all the difference, is just being open and getting to know someone and learning.
I think you mentioned a couple important things, one of which you said your thought process was, well, you didn't choose this. And I think that's the biggest thing that kind of instilled the whole bigotry towards gay people, was because I don't know who in the past said that it was a choice. And I do know they tried to change that. You've spoken about electroshock therapy. Is that a thing they would do?
Yeah.
So what, they just shock them
They would show them. So this came from the work of Pavlov and Skinner, behaviorism that was really popular in the 50s, where it's a type of psychology that they started with dogs and rats and pigeons, where they learned that you could positively and negatively reinforce behavior or punish behavior. And it's really simple. You give a reward to encourage behavior, and you take away the reward to discourage behavior. And you can punish someone to encourage or discourage a behavior, and you can take away the punishment to encourage or discourage a behavior. And, it works with the rats and the pellet, it works with the pigeons. And so they basically were able to, like with Pavlov, if you study Pavlov, he basically had a dog, and he had a bell, and he had some food, and he would ring the bell and nothing would happen with the dog. But then he would introduce the food, and every time the dog would eat the food, he would ring the bell. And because when you introduce the food, the dog salivates. So over time, if you pair the ringing of the bell with the dog seeing the food and salivating, ultimately that conditioning gets to the point where you can pull the food away, ring the bell, and guess what the dog does? salivates.
Yeah.
So that's classic conditioning. And so they applied that to gay people. They said, all right, so gay people, and this is a faulty assumption, gay people are gay because they didn't have the right relationship with their dad, or they were sexually abused, or whatever theory they had that had no basis in reality. Mm-hmm. So whatever messed you up to make you gay, we're going to condition you to, if you're a guy, to like women instead of men. So what they would do is they would try and use what they call aversion therapy, which is they show you gay porn, which will arouse your genitals, and then they'll put little electrodes on your genitals and shock you, deliver you an electronic shock every time you got an erection. And the theory was, if you distributed enough electronic shock to their genitals, every time you showed them porn, male porn, over time, you would recondition their brain to no longer be attracted to men.
Jeez. Was it effective in any way?
It drove them suicidal. And there are several instances of patients of this study that ended up killing themselves.
Oh, jeez. That's terrible.
Yeah.
I had no idea that was a thing.
Yeah.
And they didn't choose it, because everyone I knew in like elementary school that I thought was gay, or anyone that's come out as gay since, it's like, oh, that totally makes sense.
Yeah, so I was chosen to give this TED Talk because I did a PhD in the LGBT Mormon experience, and I surveyed 1,612 gay people, LGBT people, for my study. On average, they knew by the time they were 13 that they were gay or lesbian.
Yeah.
And that's not just 10
That's
people.
Puberty there.
But it's 1,600 people.
Right. And
it's not until you get the hormones coursing through your veins where you kind of realize who you're attracted to. And you didn't, the cliche that's true, did you choose to I assume you're attracted to women. Are you married?
I am attracted to women. I'm not married, no.
Did you choose to be attracted to women?
No.
Did you go,
I've been attracted to women
Did you sit there and you go, okay, I'm going to look around the classroom. There's boys and girls. I think I'll be attracted to girls. Let me see. Wait, I could go either way.
No, it's something that happens. In fact, one of our traditions when we have men on the show is we ask them their first childhood boners. Mine was Carmen Sandiego, and I was like 7 years old.
Mine was Ginger and Marianne on Gilligan's Island. I'm older than you.
Right. I saw that on TV
Look them
Land.
Look them up sometime.
I didn't think I would ask you your first boner story, but there it is. John Dehlin.
Ginger.
Gilligan's Island.
Yeah.
That's interesting, though, because that is, and it's funny because I discovered this TED Talk of yours, and, a couple years later I had extended and close family members, without going into detail, deal with the same thing. And I watched that affect my family, and there were wedges driven because of it. And I was kind of a voice, and I kind of just took what you said. I said, look, at the end of the day, if we love our family members and we love our friends, we want them to be happy. We want them to feel accepted. If we can't make sense of why someone is the way they are, who are we to cause that to drive a wedge between us and affect their happiness ultimately? So I think what you did is a good thing. I also think, and you can tell me if you disagree, I also think that there's probably a balance. And I think the pendulum swing can go too far in any direction on any issue. And we definitely shouldn't make people think that gay people are bad. But do you also think, well, this is an interesting topic because you surveyed how many people, they all knew they were gay by the age of 13.
On average.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do you think that someone could be convinced otherwise, though? Like, what if I was raised to be gay? Do you think that could have happened?
Can someone be raised to be gay?
Right. And the reason I'm asking this is because there's a lot going on now. Like in California, there's a lot of people that are wanting to be able to give their children sex changes at the ages of under 10. There's a lot of people wanting to basically choose the gender of their child, even if they say it's the child's choice. Have you heard about this being talked about?
I've studied a little bit about it, yeah.
I think that's a dangerous thing as well, because I think people can change a lot in their process of maturity.
My understanding is most doctors don't encourage any type of surgery until later. That my understanding is you don't do surgery on kids for transgender sort of stuff. But I'm not an expert on that. But
Right.
Anyway.
It's an interesting concept, though, because I was in Fiji this last year, and there's a lot of gay men in Fiji. And I got researching, and I guess in certain Polynesian cultures, it's custom to raise the third son of a family. I think it's the third son, to raise him as a woman, to like help out with the mom around the house. And almost always they end up being gay. So again, it's something to think about if the other side is possible, if it's possible to be convinced to be.
So the research that I'm familiar with, and Lisa Diamond is a really good expert here locally at the University of Utah, it is true, and this is a little bit complicated, it is true that sexuality can be fluid. In other words, it can be possible for a woman to, like men, be attracted to men, only date men, and then when she's 22 in college, all of a sudden develop feelings for a female roommate and even have a fling, or whatever, when you would have asked her, where are you on the Kinsey scale? And she would have said a 0, meaning I have 0 attraction to women. And or it's possible that someone just, it's possible that someone just midlife or somewhere in their life all of a sudden has feelings that they didn't remember having before, right? Mm-hmm. What the research seems to suggest is nobody can choose that it happens to you, but you don't just all of a sudden say, I'm going to be aroused by men. And so I could just ask you, what could I do to make you aroused by dudes? Like, could I give you a banana and make you aroused by dudes? Could I show you lots of naked dudes dancing around? And is that going to, over time, make you aroused by dudes?
I would tell you no. I would say no.
Right. And so it is true that there is a sense to which your body is going to respond to touch.
Yeah.
So, I guess in theory that someone could have experiences that others don't have and find out more information about what does and doesn't arouse them. And there are a decent amount of people that are bisexual, and they would never know that until they experimented. Okay? So let's just say there's a woman that grows up and she just thinks, I'm not, I like guys because I'm conditioned to like guys, and I'm supposed to get married because I'm Mormon to a guy. But when I kiss this guy, it's okay, but it's not great. And I get married to him, and when we start to have sex, it's like, sex is okay. I'm not really into it, but I'll do it for him, right? So you can go this whole time, and to everyone and to yourself, you appear heterosexual. But in reality, you've never, ever experimented with the same sex to know what might be arousing to you, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so you can get to the point where, you're never sleeping with your husband. Sex just isn't important to you. He just thinks you're not interested. You may think you're asexual or just don't like sex. And then let's just say the marriage blows up and you're on your own. And then one day you just have a chance to date a woman and you're that woman. All of a sudden you may find, whoa, fireworks. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that she was somehow changed, that divorce caused her to be lesbian? Or could it be possible that she never had the experience to begin with, so never had a chance to find out what was truly arousing to her? And it wasn't until she had that experience where she realized, I'm not asexual. I'm just, I like women, but I never had the chance to ever really explore it. So life's complicated, and the experiences can influence your awareness, and sexuality can be fluid, but all the research that I've shown supports the idea that someone can't be turned, their sexuality can't be overtly controlled or manipulated, and that a person can't choose who they're attracted to. And I can just tell you, I've never once been attracted to a guy, and I'm a 0.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything anyone could do to make me attracted to guys. And
I would say the same thing, but there's some men like Cristiano Ronaldo. I'm 0 as well. I'm a 0. But I would probably rather do something sexual with him than certain women. What does that mean?
I don't know.
What does that mean with
I
the
don't
scale
know.
of things?
You ought to go find out what that means.
But I think I'm a 0.
Yeah. So if a life experience can make someone open to something they weren't before, it could be they were just bisexual all along, but until life presented them with an opportunity, they would have never had a way to discover it.
Yeah.
And sometimes we could interpret that as them changing their sexual orientation, but in reality, they're just discovering it truly for the first time because they never had the chance to before. I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, you are.
I'm not. This isn't like my field of expertise right now. It's something I studied, but I'm giving you my best explanation.
Cool. So what do you think of the policy change
So
with the children of gay couples can now be baptized? They couldn't 3 years ago. They invoked it. What was
3.5? Yeah.
Okay. Now they're taking it back, which is a good thing, right?
So it's mixed. It's mixed. I'm, the number one concern I think for people who really care about people is that Utah is twice or 3 times the national average for LGBT youth suicides.
Jeez.
So, yeah, Utahns who are between the ages of 15 and 24 who are LGBT are something between 2 and 3 times more likely to kill themselves than youth outside of Utah. So,
wow.
And that's risen since 2008. What happened in 2008? Proposition 8, where the church fought gay marriage in California. So I'm not saying that that's the only thing that's going on. There are lots of factors to suicide and to cultural influences. But the November 2015 policy was heinous by any account. There are Mormon apostles who would tell you if you sat with them in private that they hated that policy. So, and there's no question that it's led to multiple suicides, that policy alone. Because when you imagine if you're a boy, right? And they were to tell you, you know those cute girls and you know those happy families and you know those fathers that get to have kids, you're never going to be able to marry that cute girl and you're never going to be able to be that dad to those kids. And your life is going to be being alone without any love or intimacy, just working, paying the bills, and being alone. That's basically what you tell a young kid when you tell them to be celibate, right?
Right.
And who wants to, I don't know if
It's
you've
a
ever
sad thought.
tried being alone, if you've
Yeah.
ever tried being alone for an extended period of time without any touch or intimacy.
It's tough.
It kills you.
Yeah.
It kills you. It's actually lethal.
Well, it's hard for me for a stretch of time, is what I'm saying.
Dude,
but I can't imagine living your life
You can't
that
go
way.
7 days. You can't go 7 days.
It's a
Maybe you can't go 3. I don't know.
right.
But imagine telling a kid you'll never have that. It makes you want to kill yourself. So
Because what do you look forward to? It's loneliness.
you
loneliness.
make money to come home to be lonely. Like, what's the point? So when they did that policy, they're basically saying, and this was outrageous, they're saying to get married to someone you love, legally married to someone you love and are attracted to, is worse than murder, rape, and pedophilia. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought of it that way, but that November 2015 policy declared same-sex marriage an immediate act of apostasy, immediately triggering a disciplinary council.
Because you're saying that children of gay kids could not get baptized, but children of...
No. It started with the couple itself. So the kids was a second part to the policy. The first part of the policy was categorizing same-sex marriage as worse than murder, rape, incest, and child molestation. Because you know what? There are hundreds and even thousands of men running around Mormon churches who have molested children, okay, who were not excommunicated. They were disfellowshipped or maybe they were quietly disciplined, but it is not mandatory in the Mormon church to excommunicate a pedophile.
Wow.
It is not mandatory in the Mormon church to excommunicate a murderer. It is not mandatory in the Mormon church to excommunicate someone who sleeps with their own child. It is that November 2015 policy made it mandatory to hold a disciplinary council and excommunicate someone who married the love of their life.
Sex.
And oddly,
That's crazy. I didn't know that. I
that's
just
true.
heard about the
That's
children.
100% true. 100%.
Wow.
And the really weird twisted thing is, if that same gay kid in 2015, instead of marrying the love of their life and being monogamous and settling down to have a healthy, committed, loving, relationship, were to not get married and just sleep with anything that they could sleep with,
They don't get excommunicated.
no excommunication.
Yeah, it's tough.
So that, along with the kids thing, was causing people to kill themselves. It's like
huge, yeah.
The church thinks I'm worse than a rapist, worse than a pedophile, worse than a murderer. So is there any doubt why that was a major factor to suicide? In Utah. Repealing that policy is going to cause less kids to kill themselves. That's a positive thing. Now, why is it not just an unambiguous good? Because, number one, LGBT people are still told in Mormonism that their nature is evil, that their nature is wicked, that who they love, who they are oriented to love, their same-sex orientation is 100% as natural and as non-chosen as yours is. That's what all the scientific evidence shows. If you believe in gravity, if you believe in, pick your scientific principle, science and even the church now is acknowledging that people do not change they do not choose their sexual orientation. So if they don't choose it and you're condemning it so that they have to live a life of solitude, that part hasn't been fixed. So yes, it's nice that they've repealed it. It's not nice that they haven't gone and actually said that God loves you. God made you this way. You deserve love. Go find committed, monogamous, healthy love and live a happy, fulfilled, meaningful life, and adopt kids if you want, or have kids in surrogate. Why shouldn't we be encouraging, if we believe in monogamous, committed love as a church, why shouldn't we want that for them? Why do they have to live a life of... So that's a problem. That hasn't been fixed. The other problem is there's no apology. The brethren didn't say, we're so sorry for all the families that were ripped apart. We're so sorry that this mistake has caused so much damage. Tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of Mormons have left the church over this issue. 3.5 years later, oops, our bad. We take it back. And then they claimed it was a revelation then. So Russell M. Nelson, within a few months of that policy, gave a speech at BYU, Idaho, saying that the policy was a revelation from God. Does it make any sense to anyone that 3.5 years ago, God made Revelation X, and then 3.5 years later, he makes Revelation Y that undoes the previous revelation 100%? Why would God do that?
I see what you're saying, and I think it's a good point. Just to play devil's advocate a little bit, I think the same point can be made on both sides, because for the active members, the prophet can never make a mistake, because whatever happens at that time, they believe divinely should have happened that time. Even if 3.5 years later, they're like, yeah, let's get this out of there. That wasn't a good thing. They think, oh, for some divine purpose it was, and now it's not. It's a good gig to be the prophet and have believers, because they're always going to take what you say and be like, it must be.
How do you know the prophet is speaking doctrine? His mouth is moving.
Well, has someone said that?
No, I'm just, that's kind of I don't know. It's a saying. It doesn't matter if the first presidency signs a declaration in the mid-1950s saying blacks will never hold the priesthood until after the millennium, and this is doctrine signed by the first presidency. If over time it gets politically or socially expedient to get rid of that doctrine, and we do, fast forward to when the Gospel Topics Essays comes out, the essay says, oh, they were just speaking as men, or oh, those were just the opinions of men. And everybody's like, oh, okay. So it doesn't matter if prophets Y contradict explicitly prophets, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P.
Right.
Mormons only care about what the current prophet is saying and don't hold them responsible if what they're teaching contradicts past prophets. And it's fine. It's fine. It's the way to.
They don't. But then on the other side,
religion healthy.
On the anti side, it's like they can never do anything right, because whatever they do, someone's going to find a problem with it somehow. even if they're doing a good thing. Would you not say that?
I don't like those types of people. I explicitly condemn any person that only sees bad in church leaders or only sees bad things in the church. I think that's evil and wicked. So I will tell you, I think the church does more good than harm. I think the church helps families, it helps marriages, it helps raise good kids, it helps raise moral, healthy individuals for the most part. It contributes to society in super important ways. And I could list 1,000 good things that the church has done in my life and it does in people's lives. And I'll tell you, I think undoing the November 2000 policy was a good decision, and it showed a lot of courage for them to do that. Now, did they do it because, they were worried about LGBT suicides and they realized they were wrong? Did they do it because so many people have left the church since then that they were seeing the attendance rolls slump and the millennials defecting en masse and the tithing rolls? I'm sure it was a lot of things. So I'm not saying it was pure, the decision, like altruistically pure, but I'm willing to say it was a good thing that they undid that.
And who knows the real motives? We can have our opinions of what it was.
We're making it up.
Right.
But I'm just going to tell you, I agree with you. I condemn any ex-Mormon or critic of the church that's unwilling to acknowledge the good that the leaders do and that the church does.
Yeah. I think you make a good point with that. And you also...
But I also condemn Orthodox Mormons that see no bad.
Right. Because it's sweeping under the table and you can never... It's a great audience, right? If you're one of the brethren, it's a great audience because whatever you say or do, they're going to give you the benefit of the doubt.
The founder of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard, started out as a fiction writer. He just wrote science fiction.
Yeah, that's right.
And he made some money off of that, but then he started turning it into a religion. And he realized by looking around, and he has this quote: "If you want to make money, start a business. If you want to make really good money, start a religion."
Yeah, I've heard the quote.
And it's true because people have these needs. What happens when I die? What's the purpose of life? How do I live a moral life? How do I be happy? And religions just plug into that and they say, okay, I'll tell you what your purpose is. I'll tell you what happens when you die. I'll tell you what's meaningful. I'll tell you how to live. And all it's going to cost you is 10% of your income, 3 to 5 hours a week, your exact obedience, and I'll help you be happy. And you know what? For many people, they say, sign me up. That's a great deal. And I think for many people, it is a really good deal. And overall, again, I think religions help a lot of people. So, but let's just be clear. It's a good gig.
Right. No, it is.
Being a prophet of a religion or a guru or a priest or a pastor is a good gig.
Yeah. Your purpose for starting the podcast is kind of divert. You started in 2005. That obviously is your why behind that has probably changed, right? Why did you originally start it?
So when I started it, there were all these issues that were problems within the church. So I lost my Orthodox faith so I grew up very Orthodox. Like to this day, I've never tried alcohol, never tried a cigarette.
Even after the
never.
Excommunication?
Even now.
Isn't that what you're supposed to do? Just go rage it after?
To this date, I've had sex with one woman. Like I'm as Mormon. I'm the most Mormon ex-Mormon on the planet. But I'm just telling you, I was super Mormon. Okay, seminary president.
Yeah.
Zone leader on my mission, full ride scholarship to BYU, Peter priesthood. Right. Didn't swear. Had lots of opportunities to have sex with girls in high school. There's no way I would have done it. I didn't even masturbate before I got married. Not one time. So anyway,
that's something I just discovered as like a 9-year-old, and it just happened. I know. Just figured it out. No one told me about it.
I was a freak. So anyway, I loved the church. The church was amazing in my life. It was amazing. But I was taught all this stuff that wasn't true. I was taught that Joseph Smith had one wife. I was taught that Native Americans are descendants of Israelites, right? I was taught that the Book of Abraham was a translation of ancient Egyptian papyrus. I was taught that Joseph Smith was the most righteous man next to Jesus who ever walked the face of the earth. I was taught all these things that I just assumed were true up until I was 31. And while I was working at Microsoft, I was called as a seminary teacher. And this is before the internet. This is before CES Letter. This is before the Gospel Topics Essays or Mormon Stories Podcast. And I started having just a few questions. I'm like, I want to be really good. I never understood that polygamy thing. Now I'm going to really try and understand it. Never really understood some of these other issues. I want to understand it. And I started reading some books that I was always told never to read because they were anti-Mormon. It turns out that the books only said the things that are now said in the Gospel Topics Essays. In other words, last century's anti-Mormon literature is this century's Gospel Topics Essays. Mm-hmm. But I learned those before the Gospel Topics Essays come out. So I learned all this history that the church wasn't what it claims to be, and I learned that LGBT people were killing themselves, and I realized that the Book of Mormon was super racist, and that we had a really racist past, and I realized that we didn't treat women very well, and so I thought, and I tried to talk to my bishop. He didn't want to talk about it, didn't know any of this stuff. Tried to talk to my parents. They didn't know the stuff. They didn't want to talk about it. Tried to talk to my siblings. Tried to talk to my elders quorum president. Nobody knew this stuff, and nobody wanted to talk about it. So I started Mormon Stories because I thought it can't be good that we just sweep all these things under the rug if they're racist, sexist, homophobic, untrue, causing people to wreck their lives, causing people to develop addictions, causing marriages to dissolve because of the stress and sadness and problems that were all under the surface, just bubbling, that no one could ever talk about. So I started Mormon Stories in 2005 with the intent of opening up the conversation, educating people about the problems, and bringing on the best minds, pro and con, so that they could be discussed openly. And my hope was we could become a more open-minded, knowledgeable, progressive church.
So at that point, you weren't necessarily against the church.
I was active.
You were still part of it. You were active.
I was temple recommend holding, active, faithful, committed. I wasn't an Orthodox believer because you can't study the origins of the Book of Mormon or the origins of the Book of Abraham and believe that they were translations. Those two books are not translations. You can call them lots of things. You can't call those two books translations. And we were taught that they were translations. So that changes you forever. And you can't learn that Joseph Smith married 14-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 9 wives of other men, and ever look at him the same way again, in knowing that he lied to Emma about it, and that Emma was like the 22nd wife that he was sealed to. And he lied to her for the first 21 wives.
It's an uncomfortable thing. Yeah, it is for sure. But polygamy was a thing in the Bible. God gave wives to David. He gave wives to many different people.
They took wives. Are you sure he gave them to them?
If you believe in the Bible, you can make the argument. That's why I say it's so strange. I don't believe polygamy is a good thing. I actually personally don't believe it's something that was that necessary. I probably don't even believe God commanded it for us.
Yeah.
But just to say as a disclaimer, it is something that is in the Bible. But Christians aren't up in arms about that.
Well, it's in the Old Testament. Christians would not be in favor of it today.
Right.
But in the Old Testament,
it's a different.
You got killed if you didn't, if you didn't do the right thing on Saturday, or if a woman
was a different God
handled her menstruation in the wrong way, or if you ate the wrong animal, you could be killed and stoned. Like, you can't use the Old Testament as a standard for anything.
Right. So
anyway, I started Mormon Stories to open up the discussion, to try and make people aware, and to try and build a culture where we could talk openly about things. In a time where the church had a history of excommunicating people who discussed anything controversial. So I went to BYU in 88 to 93, and at 93, they excommunicated 6 scholars for talking about feminism, for talking about polygamy, for talking about Joseph's use of folk magic and treasure digging and peepstones in a hat to find buried treasure. The church is like, nobody should be talking about this stuff because it's going to cause members to lose their faith. So we're going to excommunicate everyone who talks about this stuff. And that happened my senior year at BYU. And so for that next 10 years, 11, 12 years, there was this huge chill where everyone was scared to talk about anything. Everyone was scared to learn anything. Everyone was scared to open up. And I just said, things don't get better by burying them. So I started Mormon Stories to say, no, we got to talk about this stuff. Mm-hmm. And you fast forward to 2013, the church is not, not only not excommunicating people for talking about this stuff, they're publishing these essays that admit all the stuff in 2013 that they were excommunicating people for talking about in 1993. If you look at Richard Bushman's book, Rough Stone Rolling, there's nothing in there that Fawn Brodie didn't write in 1945 of any consequence. Fawn Brodie was David O. McKay's niece. She was excommunicated. Richard Bushman in 2005 quotes Fawn Brodie as his primary source for Rough Stone Rolling, and he's celebrated as the greatest scholar in Joseph Smith. Facts were the same. He just spun it in a faithful way. But we've changed over the past 14 years. We've changed Mormon discourse where now the church realizes it can no longer punish and excommunicate people for talking openly about factual things. And that was a main objective for Mormon Stories, and I think we accomplished it.
Yeah. But your guests, it didn't seem that was always the theme. Wasn't it just people telling were all of your guests people who have left the church, or were
No.
active?
The strategy was, number one, to be the only podcast in Mormonism, and I think we're still this way, that interviews faithful and non-faithful people.
Right.
So we've interviewed, on the faithful side, Daniel Peterson, professor at BYU, chief apologist for the Mormon Church. We've interviewed Terrell and Fiona Givens, authors of several faithful books to keep people in the church. We interviewed Richard Bushman. We've interviewed the son of Spencer W. Kimball, Ed Kimball. I could list you 40 faithful Mormons that we've interviewed on Mormon Stories. And we've interviewed just regular Mormons, and we've interviewed people who've left the church, scholars, scientists. We tried to be a place where it didn't matter whether you're in or out, believed or didn't. We just wanted to let people tell their stories and get to the bottom of things that are true, and stop believing things that are false.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the intent was never, even to this day, the intent is not to lead people out of the church. The intent is to educate people, to help them feel like they're not crazy, to help them feel like they're not alone, to model the open discussion of difficult issues, and to get the church to be more open and honest, and to get Mormons to become more aware of their religion, and to be able to feel comfortable talking about it. And guess what? In 2019, there's never been a time in Mormonism where Mormons are more comfortable talking about difficult things.
It's probably just because the information's everywhere now. Wouldn't you say so? I mean, it coincided with...
But it took people like, let's just say, the September 6th or the Mormon History Association or Grant Palmer or Simon Southerton or, Mormon Stories Podcast or Jeremy Runnels. It took people who were willing to publish things on the internet or publish podcasts on the internet, John Larson, Bill Reel, Lindsay Hansen Park, whoever it is. It took courageous Mormons willing to openly write about and discuss these things for it to actually penetrate Mormon consciousness. Because Fawn Brodie's book has been there since 1945, but guess what? No one read it because they were all told it was anti-Mormon
literature.
The Tanners have been there since the 60s and 70s. Well, guess what? All the stuff that now the church is admitting was the stuff that Sandra Tanner and Grant Palmer and Fawn Brodie was writing about. There's no difference. What did Fawn Brodie say? That Joseph Smith married over 30 women. Is that true? It's true. Did he have sex with some of those women? Yes. Did he marry other people's wives? Yes. Is there a problem that Native American DNA doesn't trace back to Israel, but instead tracks back to Asia? Yes, that's a fact. It's a fact that the Book of Mormon, it's a fact that the Book of Abraham claims to be a translation of a papyrus, but when Egyptologists study the papyrus, the word Abraham doesn't even appear anywhere in the papyrus, not even once.
Isn't there an argument that it was lost in the Chicago fire or something like that, part of it, or is that just something I heard?
No, part of the scroll was burned, but not the part that Joseph Smith translated.
Oh.
Because he made photocopies and put in the newspaper, and and we published in our Book of Mormon the hieroglyphs, and those were the facsimiles. That's all stuff that remains in the papyrus that we have. The church admits all this now. But I'm just saying 20 years ago, they would excommunicate you if you talked openly about it.
Well, I think truth is important. I think getting to the bottom of things is important. And just to kind of clarify, because again, our listeners there's active listeners, there's inactive ones. I don't want people to think I think whatever it is, the truth is good. But whether that is supposed to leave people in the sense of, again, is your goal changed since you've been excommunicated, that your goal is, these are the facts, therefore you should isolate yourself from the church, you should stay within the church? What's your
I counsel people all the time to stay in the church. I think if you can, okay, first of all, there's a whole bunch of people who are never going to want to learn any of this stuff. They're never going to care about LGBT people. They're never going to care about racism. They're never going to care about feminism. And they're never going to want to learn controversial things about Joseph Smith. They're happy in the church. It makes them happy. My opinion about them is they should stay happy, stay in the church. So I have no desire to hurt them, okay? There are people who the church is hurting. So I would say the church is hurting LGBT people, right? In that case, I want those LGBT people to find a church or an organization or a worldview where that doesn't make them want to kill themselves, that teaches them that they can find love, committed love, raise a family, and have all the happiness that you or I want to have. So I do wish that for them. Now, am I opposed to gay people staying in the church? No, but I want them to at least know that they have options separate from suicide. Now, there's another group of people in between who aren't those, and these are the people that don't know the truth about the church, right? Because they never learned it like me. And they're happy in it, but their allegiance is to truth. In other words, if they were to find out the church isn't what it claims to be, they would want to know. And even if it was inconvenient, even if it was, oh, this may affect my marriage, or oh, I may lose some friends over this, or my mom and dad may not be happy, or this may hurt my income, but they're like, but truth matters. And I want to base my life on truth, not whitewashed sort of fraud or manipulation, right? Mm-hmm. I want those people who would want to know the truth to learn all the truth about what the church really is and how the church helps and harms people. And then if they've learned it so that they're like, okay, now I know what I'm a member of, right? And then they say, but I'm still good with it. It makes me happy. My feeling is stay in the church, because overall your life is going to be healthier and happier if you stay in the church, as long as you do it knowing exactly what you're a member of, right? Yeah. So that there's no surprises. You know what you're a part of, and you engage it with sort of full consent.
Right.
But what I also think is there's going to be some people that are like, I'm in this thing. There's some people who are in the church because it's good, right? It helps their marriage. It helps them raise kids. It gives them a sense of community and identity. It makes them feel good. Those people are probably going to stay in the church no matter what. There are other people who are in the church because they believe it's true. And if it's not true, or if it's not true in the way they were taught, they want to know that, because they would be okay losing some of those benefits, because they'd rather build their lives on what's true than on what's convenient or comfortable or easy. And not everyone's the same that way. But I know a lot of people who are willing to face the fire of social rejection or stress or pain because they have a real allegiance to truth.
Right.
And those people deserve to know exactly what they're a member of, so they can make choices about how they spend their money, how they spend their time, what they give their reputation and time to, and they can do that with full consent versus having been conditioned as a child to blindly follow something that isn't what they were told it actually was. So that's really it. I love the church. I want as many people to stay in the church who are happy and healthy and thriving, who do so with full consent and full knowledge of what they're a part of.
You talk a lot about faith crises as well. And that's one of the reasons why, whether the church is true or not true, because it's a possibility, John, that these things you're talking about are true, but the church still is true. I think it's still possible that there could be mistakes and people can screw up because it is run by men, and there is that argument. But that being said, I think a lot of people are better left in the church than out.
Can't argue with that. I do not believe that if churches and religion went away, that the world would be better. I think religion has been an inextricably positive part of human advancement. It's what's made families more healthy, more functional. It's what civilized savage men from being warriors and hunter-gatherers to like good fathers and good husbands. I think religion has played a really important role of civilizing humanity and making them a little more ethical, a little more civilized, a little more, in spite of all the carnage, because there has been carnage.
Right.
And religious carnage.
Over religion in the name of God. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tons.
And abuse of, religious abuse and religious fraud. I mean, just pick any other religion. There's been fraud, there's been corruption, there's been abuse, but that's just part of humanity.
Any
right?
form of power, whether it's religious or not, any form of power could be
You
corrupted.
put a bunch of atheists together in a big 1,000-person group, you're going to get abuse and pedophilia, and you're going to get financial scandals and crazy fraud, and you're going to get that too. Like, it is part of the human experience. I don't blame religion for that. So I agree with you that religion has been a net positive contributing force to the evolution of mankind. No question.
Right.
And Mormonism is a part of that.
And that being said, but it's never a reason to shy away from truth and to hide things. And so that's why I think this day and age, it's a lot of good things.
But it's the point is, for me, is that religions have to, it's kind of grow or die. You can't just stay how you are and thrive. And when Mormon leaders were able to limit people's access to information and punish them for reading No Man Knows My History or reading the Tanners and make them so scared that they wouldn't learn about Joseph Smith and the Book of Abraham and the Book of Mormon, that was fine, But in the internet age, those techniques don't work anymore. And so all these skeletons have to come out of the closet and we have to deal with them. And it's really, testing the church's mettle of what the church really is, because the church can't just stay as it was and thrive. And I think the number one reason that they changed the November 2015 policy 3.5 years after they implemented it was because they were hemorrhaging members. The stats are that over half of returned missionaries who have come home over the past, let's just say 5 or 10 years, have left the church. 2/3 of all people baptized into the church have left the church. We claim 16 million members. There's only 4 or 5 million people in the world who actually identify as Mormon. And the church is shrinking in Europe. It's shrinking in Japan. It's shrinking in Korea. And the only thing that's keeping it growing in the United States is the birth rate, because Mormons have on average 3 kids. So that helps offset all the people who are leaving and the missionary program in the United States coming to a virtual screeching halt. So the church is, realizing that the old ways aren't going to work. And huge credit to Russell M. Nelson for these changes. If you look at the common theme of all the changes he's made over the past year, church is 2 hours instead of 3. Missionaries can call home. Get rid of the home teaching program. What are some of the, getting rid of the November 2015 policy? What are some of the other big changes they've made?
Those are the ones I can think of.
What do they all have in common? They make it easier to be a Mormon. They take stress away. They take some of the pain and some of the difficulty away, and they make it just a little bit easier to be Mormon. And that's smart, because if you don't change, you're going to die. So credit to Russell M. Nelson for realizing that we have to change or we're going to die, because all the other religions are dying, right? Not all, but
and that's one thing that's fair. Religion as a whole, I think, in society is becoming less popular.
In the United States, the largest and the fastest growing religious group is those who no longer affiliate with any religious tradition. It is now past 25%. There's no other religious group that's 25% of the population. And what should be startling to people is the growth rate. Mm-hmm. If you look at the growth rate of, it's called the rise of the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, people who put none when they're asked what religion they are, they put none. That group has had like geometric growth, like a 45-degree growth curve, right? Yeah. You want a 45-degree growth curve. I don't care what you want to grow. A 45-degree growth curve is a good curve, mm-hmm. right? And that's the rise of this group. In 50 to 100 years, that's going to be 50, 60, 70% of the population if projections hold. unless there's some famine or war that like puts everybody back into sort of this Orthodox mentality. And you just have to look at Europe. We're going the way of Western Europe, which is highly secular. And so religions have to either change or die. So kudos to Russell and Nelson.
And I think it's a good thing. Again, whether it's the church is completely true or not true or completely outright false, I think it's a good thing because you've talked about how there's different types of Jews, right? There's Orthodox. Right. There's what is the new term?
So there's Hasidic ultra-Orthodox Jews, then there's Orthodox Jews, then there's conservative Jews, and then there's Reform Jews. And then there's Reconstructionist Jews, but think of it as a spectrum.
There's also Messianic Jews, which I've read about, which believe that Christ was the Messiah, but that's something you should look into. It's interesting. It's growing very popularly. Yeah. But anyways.
But the point is, you've got everything from these Jews who live in their own clustered groups. They speak Yiddish. They don't let any outsiders in. They're super strict on all their rules. You've got a spectrum from that all the way to Jews that don't believe in God, that have lesbian rabbis, that don't care if you ever believe that Moses existed, who's the founder of their religion. And it's like, if you want to be a Jew, be a Jew. They don't care because it's not about your beliefs. It's just about being part of a community. You've got this wide variety and then all sorts of stuff in the middle. Ones who keep kosher, ones who don't, ones who follow the rituals, ones who don't. And it's even okay to say...
And they all take care of each other.
I mean, there are actually competition and animosity between some of the groups. But the point is, if you want to be a Jew, you can find your group, right? And if somebody says, I'm a secular Jew or I'm an atheist Jew, nobody questions your Jewness. You're a Jew because you say you're a Jew and you've got that heritage. And I think it would be good for Mormonism to be flexible enough to have liberal Mormons and progressive Mormons and secular Mormons, because otherwise you just have ex-Mormons.
Right. Well, I think that's a good thing, and that's why I said I think a lot of people are best left in the church than leaving, is because you do one thing that's against, and you kind of feel like you need to isolate yourself from the church. Let's say a young guy goes out and parties with some friends that aren't Mormon, and then he feels bad and doesn't want to go to church because he's embarrassed, he's ashamed, and then he just leaves altogether. Was that the best thing for him to do in his life when the church could have brought him all this other good? Or it could be the best thing. I don't know. I think it's situational with every person because there's a hell of a lot of people that leave and don't end up in a better place. Whether that means that, the church is true because they left and they're sad now, they're not happy in their life, or whether that's just because they felt lost because what they thought was true.
Yeah, that's tricky. I know tens of thousands of ex-Mormons who are super happy and healthy and functional and thriving. And I know a lot of people who had anxiety or depression or obsessive compulsive disorder or a really bad marriage or whatever it was, where leaving the church was an important part of them becoming well. And they become better parents. They have a better marriage. Like we can show both sides, and I can show you 1,000 people who left the church and wrecked their lives. So, a lot of that's confirmation bias, where you see the evidence that supports your point of view. And I don't like operating that way. We all do it, but I try not to. I think you can wreck your life leaving Mormonism, and I think you can upgrade your life leaving Mormonism. And there's everything in between. But I will say this, there's a couple complexity things to that factor. Sometimes when someone leaves Mormonism, their parents are disappointed in them. Their community rejects them. Their friends abandon them. And guess what happens when your parents reject you, your community rejects you, your friends abandon you, and they all think you're a bad person? Guess what that does to you?
It takes a toll on you either way, yeah.
You all of a sudden start developing addictive behaviors to anesthetize the depression and the anxiety that you're feeling by having been rejected by everybody that you loved and cared about, right? So that's a self-fulfilling prophecy that we inflict on people, because we can make people feel so judged and marginalized and bad about themselves that we actually create the dysfunction that we want to see to make us feel better about our choices. So if we can make it really bad for people who leave the church so that their lives are wrecked, then we can say, look, see what happens when you leave the church. Your life gets wrecked. When in reality, we contributed to that self-destruction.
Yeah.
Now, there are other people that are loved by their Mormon family and friends, and they just make stupid choices and wreck their lives. That's a tragedy too. And I know plenty of Mormons that would have been better, plenty of ex-Mormons that would have been better staying in the church. No question, right? But it's not, there are also a lot of people who were dying inside the church. There are people who were clinically depressed inside the church. They were, let's just say some kid, like you said, started masturbating. But instead of having a loving bishop, they had some bishop that made them feel like they were a pervert and evil and dark. And so they what they did is they learned how to lie, right?
Yeah.
So when they talk to the bishop or their mission president or their girlfriend or their parents or their in-laws, it's like, no, I don't do that. And then privately they're doing it. And sometimes they're doing it more because it feels good, and they're anesthetizing all the guilt and shame that the religion put upon them.
Yeah. What's the saying? 99% of kids, young boys, masturbate. The other
the 1%.
The 1% are liars.
Yeah.
Or John Dehlin, who didn't till later in life.
Until after I got married. That's another story. But the point is that there are some people. Let's just say you've been raped by your bishop, and that's happened. Let's just say that you feel betrayed by the church. Let's just say you wanted to be a working woman, but the church taught you that your only role was to be a housewife, right? Let's say you're a person of color and you were told your whole life that your dark skin is the result of a curse that some dude made, of some choice some dude made 20 generations ago, and it made you feel really bad about yourself. There are lots of people, or you're gay, right? Mm-hmm. There are lots of people who are kind of on the margins where the church works for a certain group of people, but for a certain subset of people, what's healthy and life-giving for 70% of the people is actually toxic and destructive for 30% of the people. You cannot make the argument that Mormonism is awesome for everyone who's in it.
Yeah.
Because for some people it's deadly. And that's why Utah has 2 to 3 times the suicide rates of other states, partly because there are some people trapped in this religion, and it's not just gay people, who are actually miserable and suicidal because the religion triggers in them guilt and shame or self-loathing or perfectionism that becomes toxic.
It's a tough subject, I think people need to do what brings not makes them happy, but brings them joy.
Yeah.
There's a difference between joy and happiness.
Totally.
Because that's where some people can, lose their faith and then say, I'm going to go party, I'm going to do all these other things, but it's not true happiness. For some people, maybe it is, right? Who knows? But people need to find joy and be fulfilled in life, and because but also on the other side is it's tough because I don't want to overlook the good that comes from the church and the good that the members are doing for themselves by living the gospel or what they believe it to be, and I that's where I land in an interesting spot because I'll talk about the controversial stuff and I'll admit that it's very flawed. But I've also seen miracles, As a missionary, I saw plenty of miracles that I have no idea how they happened. And I believe it was God. Whether that was God acting through me, and he would have acted through a Baptist missionary and a Buddhist monk could have experienced the same godly thing. I don't know, but I do believe that there is God and goodness in it. And I don't think that should be overlooked. And for you, it's got to be tough, though, because what happened with you getting excommunicated, I don't think it was a good reason to be excommunicated. And so you're left probably in that situation. I'd feel the same because I don't agree with the reason you were excommunicated.
Yeah. I was just a little bit early and came in a little bit hard. And I don't fault the church for excommunicating me. They're just, first of all, it's not fair that 90-year-old men are asked to run multi-billion-dollar organizations. There's no corporation our size in the world that has 90-year-olds running it. Why? Because that's not necessarily easy for 90-year-old people to do. And I'm not saying they don't have good qualities about them, but I'm just saying they have really hard jobs, especially given how freaking old they are.
Yeah.
And so what do they do with John Dehlin, who's giving TED Talks and doing podcasts and getting exposure on Good Morning America and VH1 and the Wall Street Journal? Like, they don't know what to do, and so they just do what comes natural, which is like, oh, well, they excommunicated those guys a couple decades ago. Let's try that, because they don't know what to do. And they didn't realize that excommunicate people like Kate Kelly and Bill Reel and me and Sam Young and others was actually going to make the problem worse. They didn't have the right advisors around them to see, what the Barbara Streisand effect, which is when you try and squelch, press or information. It's just like burning books. What's the best way to create an international bestseller? You condemn a book to be burned. You condemn a book to be burned,
and people want to find out why.
People want to buy it. You excommunicate a bunch of people who are talking and getting a big audience. They're going to go, hey, wonder why that guy's got an audience. I wonder why they're excommunicating him. And unfortunately, they just didn't have the wisdom to see that. But, they're learning.
And that's a good thing they're learning. But I hope that we come on this path of reconciliation and acceptance, too. Instead of ostracizing people like you, more accepting and being like, this is just one way to think. And we're all kind of part of this group. I mean, you're not part of it anymore. But I think that's more of where we're going to land.
The good news is we're 100% moving in that direction. Kate Kelly gets excommunicated for trying to get women ordained. That's unfortunate, but now all of a sudden women have a lot more prominent role in the church. And I get excommunicated for talking about LGBT problems in the church and the church's lack of honesty. That's sad, but now the church comes out with its essays and the church is more open about the foibles of Joseph Smith and its leaders. And so the church moves forward. So there's always got to be these kind of sacrificial lambs. Sam Young makes it known to the church that children are being abused, that children are being asked really gross, inappropriate, sexually explicit questions with a 12-year-old girl with a man behind a closed door asking her where she touches herself, how often. The church just kind of didn't realize how inappropriate that was because they'd always done it, and they've got 90-year leaders. They excommunicate Sam Young, but what do they also do? They change the standards and allow parents to be in those interviews with the kids. And it's just going to keep going forward. It always takes, just like that TED Talk, we'll come right back to it. It takes Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, John F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, whoever. Pick your social justice warrior, Mahatma Gandhi. It takes those leaders who come out front, stick their head out, get it head chopped off, fighting for a cause, for then the social progress to kind of follow. And it's okay. I'm alive. I'm married. I'm happily married, 25 years. I've got 4 beautiful kids. I'm able to scratch out a living, and a lot of people are grateful for what I do. So and I don't mean to compare myself to Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or Gandhi. Don't misunderstand me.
But the effect is similar.
In our little world, there are a group of us, Bill Reel, Sam Young, Kate Kelly, me, others, who have taken the bullet so that Mormon culture can advance. And it's not just us. We stand on the giants of Mormon History Association, Dialogue Foundation, Sunstone, all sorts of leaders, B.H. Roberts, Fawn Brody, the Tanners. Like, we stand on their shoulders, but we were able to kind of move the needle. And I don't think anybody can question that we did move the needle. And yeah, it sucks that the church has to chop off the heads of the people that lead to the social change. But at the same time, it's becoming less and less painful to be excommunicated. And it's almost becoming a badge of honor. Because if you look at the people who've been excommunicated in the past decade, it's been people that, just look at the LGBT stuff. I get excommunicated for fighting for LGBT rights. Now the church is admitting people don't choose to be gay. They're admitting that it's not a sin to have gay feelings. They're admitting that celibacy is fraught. They're admitting that mixed orientation marriages are problematic. They're stopping reparative therapy and conversion therapy. So we're vindicated, and that feels really good.
Yeah, and I think it's just going to
super good.
I think it's going to get better and better, and you can't argue that wasn't a pleasant experience for you. But again, I think we're moving forward, and folks are going to keep realizing that. So I really appreciate what you do, and I appreciate you coming on.
Dude, you're Mormonism's Joe Rogan.
What do you mean?
You don't know who Joe Rogan is?
Yeah, I do.
You're Mormonism's Joe Rogan.
In what way?
You're just like, you're running a podcast that's kind of like just an open conversation.
It is. Which
you got a little bit of a Joe Rogan vibe. You've got like a Mormon Joe Rogan vibe.
I take that as a compliment.
Yeah, you should.
So thank you.
I mean it as a compliment.
Are you? I wanted to ask you this earlier. Do you have like psychology in your background? Did you study the field?
I have a PhD in clinical and counseling psychology.
But you worked in tech, didn't you?
I started out at Microsoft and MIT and Bain, and I did tech for about 15 years, and then I eventually switched to psychology and got a PhD.
Okay. Because I didn't know that about you, but in talking with you, I was like, this guy he knows how people think. He gets the emotional side of things. Do you? Because I did hear you in an interview talking about counseling couples in divorce.
I do. I call it coaching because I don't treat depression or anxiety, even though I'm trained to do that. I'm an expert in it. What I like to do is when someone's in a faith crisis, when a marriage is in peril because one person loses their faith or the couple's really disoriented, I love helping them find their way to health and happiness. And by the way, my advice always to someone who is asking me if they should leave the church, my advice is always don't leave it unless you can't stay. Because I think you're always better with the church and religion in your life if it's working for you, right? The only people that should leave are the ones who are literally dying by staying in.
And what about for a couple who one is opposed to the church and one still believes it? What do you recommend for them? That
it can be an incredible opportunity for growth and maturation of the marriage. That really they have a lot more in common than they think. To the non-believer, to the believer, when their spouse loses their faith, it's like, well, we don't have nothing in common. Now all of a sudden, there's something different than what I married. But the truth is, they both still believe in honesty. They both still believe in integrity. They both still believe in marriage, usually. They both still believe in raising good kids, in serving. Their values are all still the same.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit scary, and it's a bit of a change. But what I help people see is that religion is not their problem. Their problem is they need what's called emotional intimacy. They need to learn to talk about hard things. They need to learn to see underneath why this person believes and why this person doesn't, and come to develop unconditional love.
Their love can supersede that, is what you're saying.
Because people should always come before beliefs.
Right.
Beliefs should never come before relationships. And I think Christ would agree with that.
For sure.
Yeah. So you just got to get them to realize that they can totally thrive and build an amazing life together, where one just happens to go to church on Sunday and the other doesn't. One gets fulfillment from the church and the other one gets fulfillment from riding their bikes in the bike trail. Or the non-believer can attend the church with the believer sometimes just to show support. And maybe sometimes the believer can stay home and, do something fun with the non-believer just to say, hey, I respect you and care about your way of life. And ultimately, if you've got a compassionate theology as a believer, you don't believe that God's going to keep two loving people apart from each other in the long run. He's not going to split up families because there were 4,000 churches to choose from, and you chose one of the 3,999 ones that were wrong, and so I'm going to split your family up, right? Anyone who's got a religious belief that I respect believes that God's much more compassionate and bigger than separating families, right? And that's the big irony, is that sometimes Mormonism claims to be the big protector and guardian of families, but often the way people live out Mormonism is that Mormonism is just dividing families. It's dividing the gay kids from the believers. It's dividing the believers from the non-believers. It's dividing the Mormons from the rest of the world. And the truth is, if God is successful, if God is loving, if God is compassionate, he's going to do everything he can to get us all back with him. And so we need to stop letting religion come between us and just find ways to make sure that if religion has any value, it's going to be in strengthening families and in uniting relationships, not in dividing relationships.
Wow. That's really brilliant stuff, which surprises me because you're not a member of the church. So how could you say things that are so good?
Isn't that weird? And, sometimes Satan can create the appearance of an angel of light.
That's a joke.
That's somewhere in the Doctrine and Covenants.
Yeah, no, my buddies used to joke around. I had a buddy who left the church. He wasn't active. And when he would do something good, I'd be like, strange you would do something good since you don't have a testimony in the restored gospel. It's weird.
And there's no Mormons that ever do bad things, right?
Right. Well, anyways, I think that's a really, really important thing, though. I'm glad to end with that because I think there's a lot of marriages out there that need to hear that. And is that something you do just on the side, or do you? Okay.
Yep. In fact, next weekend I'm having a retreat for mixed faith marriage retreat, where 20 couples are getting together. I'm doing it with Julie D'Azevedo-Hanks. She's a faithful psychologist whose husband's a bishop. Her dad wrote Saturday's Warrior back in the day.
Okay.
And we're co-leading a retreat for mixed faith couples to save marriages. You know?
Wow. Can anyone go to that, attend? How do they?
Yeah. You just go to mormonfaithcrisis.com/events and they can sign up to attend.
Awesome. Well, what else do you have in the works before we wrap this up? Do you have anything you want to?
We're doing a conference in June called Thrive, pulling a bunch of people together to learn about how to be better parents, how to have healthier marriages, how to have better mental health, improve your spirituality. We, even if you're the most Orthodox Mormon, I would hope that you would want ex-Mormons to find healing and health and happiness and good marriages and be good parents, etc. And many of us are tired with all the negativity in the post-Mormon community. I mean, on the one hand, the anger is understandable, and in some ways it's very healthy to process your anger. So I'm not condemning that anger, but it's easy to get stuck there, and it's easy to kind of focus on the negativity sometimes. And I've done it. It's just
we all
normal
do it.
to do
We
it.
all do it.
And
in all sides, right?
All sides.
Active, inactive, or any issue in life.
Yep. So a group of us just got together and said, why don't we create a conference where nothing's said about Joseph Smith, nothing's negative said about the church. We're just going to have like marriage experts help people have healthy marriages after they leave the church. Child experts help you raise good, parenting experts help you raise good kids. Spiritual experts help you live the best spiritual life you can. Mental health experts help you with your depression and your anxiety. Pick your topic. We're going to have cool people there to just help teach and grow.
And that's something anyone can benefit from.
This is going to be amazing for anybody. And there's going to be no negativity, no negativity, no barbs, no criticisms, because it's all about healing and growth.
Well, that's great.
It's called Thrive. You can check it out again at mormonfaithcrisis.com/events. You can check it out.
Awesome. Well, I hope a lot of people show up to that. Thanks again for coming on, John. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Good luck with your podcast.
Thank you.
Keep it going.